The natural level is known as the starting point of all hair color processes. I'm sure that you've heard this a million times. What's the natural level of the hair? And what I like to say about the natural level is this. Think of the natural level as the lightness to darkness minus the tone. Okay, lightness to darkness minus the tone. In other words, we're not talking, when we say look at the natural level or what's the natural level, I'm not asking you what's the color of the hair. I'm not saying is it red, is it blonde, is it green, purple, whatever. All I'm asking is the level, lightness to darkness minus the tone. And this is what you're looking at right here. So in a natural level swatch ring or a natural level thing such as this, you can see that this is level 2. Level 1 would even be more of a blue-black going up to level 10. So the analogy that I always use about levels is this. Think about this. If you had a glass of Coca-Cola in one hand and a glass of water in the other hand, as we all know, Coca-Cola is very dark and brown. You can't really see through it. But if I got the glass of water and I slowly poured it into the glass of Coca-Cola, the glass of Coca-Cola gets lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. And before you know it, it becomes more transparent, more translucent, okay? And that's how the natural level has to, we have to think about it, all right? So the reason that the starting point of all hair color starts at the natural level is because we have to create a plan to get us where we want to go. And the plan has to start with a starting point. And the starting point is who's sitting in your chair? What does she has naturally? Because depending on what she has naturally will depend as to what we can do with her color. Now remember, I always say, we're beauticians, not magicians. So we can't create magic. There are some things we simply cannot do. We have to live and work within what's called the laws of hair color. And then we'll get a little bit deeper into that in just a few minutes. All right. So for now, we all know the natural level does not mean red or green or purple or blue. It simply means what lightness to darkness is that. All right. Okay. Now we have to talk a little bit about what's called natural pigment. Okay. So I'm not talking about hair color here. I'm talking about natural pigment. And then we're going to talk about the decolorization of natural pigment. Natural hair color is made with 2 types of melanin. Melanin is the protein that makes up hair color. And again, this is actually hair color, skin color, and eye color. So it all kind of works in relation here. Okay, so we have what's called pheomelanin pigment, starts with a P, pheomelanin pigment, which is your red and yellow pigmentation. Okay, and then we have what's called eumelanin pigment. Eumelanin pigment, that starts with E, but it's pronounced eumelanin. It's your black and brown pigment. Okay, so these are your darker pigments and these are your lighter pigments. And depending on the person and depending on the nationality will depend on how much of each of these that you have. And I say nationality because in truth, hair color has a lot to do with nationality. I mean, for example, if you lived in Africa, you're going to be doing a lot of work on African American, or excuse me, not African American, you're doing a lot of work on African type hair. And African type hair would have a lot of eumelanin pigment and very few pheomelanin pigment. I'm not going to say none, but fewer. Okay. If you worked in, for example, Switzerland or Sweden, where all the blondes are, you're working primarily on a lot of people that have a lot of pheomelanin pigment and very few eumelanin pigment. Okay. If you work in Italy, or what I call the Mediterranean belt, Italy, France, Israel, you have a lot of dark brown hair, so you have a mix of both, okay? If you work in Scotland, you have a lot of people with darker brown hair, eumelanin, or a lot of people with really strong red, pheomelanin, okay? And this is kind of showing you here, like this little blonde girl here, she has a lot of light blonde hair, and she has few brown and black pigments and few red and yellow pigments. That's why her hair is very, very light blonde. As she gets older, like this picture of this girl here, for example, her hair, the melanin will actually grow sometimes and gets darker, okay, can develop. I'm sure all of you know of young little kids when they're towheads or little tiny kids, but as they get older, the hair becomes darker, okay? So that's why it happens. It can change. And then here we have like an Asian girl, a young Asian girl, and she would have many dark brown and black pigments and few red and yellow pigments. And here we have this little tiny girl, real cute little girl, red hair, strong, strong red hair. And here she has very few brown-black pigments and many yellow-brown pigments. Okay. So why is this interesting? Why do we have to understand this? Because understanding this will help us to understand what's going to happen when we start decolorizing it, which is really important. Okay. And also, the other thing I want to stress here also is that, you know, I talked about African hair, I talked about Asian hair, I talked about different nationalities. But in America, we're the melting pot of the world here. So we have everything here. In one given day, in your work behind a chair, you're going to see people in all these different categories. Some will have dark hair, some will have natural blonde hair, some will have gray hair, some will be redheads. So you have to know how to work on all of them, all right? If you live, for example, in Tokyo, you're working primarily, 90% of your customers, not all, but 90% would probably have very, very, dark brown hair. And if you worked in Switzerland or Sweden, most of your customers are going to have very, very blonde hair. So you become very proficient at one certain type of hair. Here in America, that's not so. You have to know how to work with all of it. So I actually find that interesting and more fun, to be honest with you. But let's talk about now what happens when we start decolorizing the natural pigment. Okay, this is where a lot of people get confused, is that we think, and the general public thinks, and of course, you know, if you're new into hair color, and again, it doesn't matter to me if you've been coloring hair for 30 years or if you're just a beauty school student. We all have to realize that there's a starting point for learning color for all of us. I mean, me myself, I didn't bother learning color for quite a few years doing hair because I was primarily a hair cutter. But when I started learning color, I had to restructure my mind, because a lot of people think that when you start decolorizing the natural pigment of the hair, it goes from dark brown to medium brown to lighter brown to lighter brown to tawny brown to very, very light blonde. And guys, this is the way your customers think their hair lightens, okay? That's why they use stuff like Sun-In on their hair, or they put peroxide on their hair and they go to the beach, because they think they're going to make their dark hair like a nice medium light brown without having to color it, because they think that's how hair lightens, all right? And then I say, yes, here, this is not the way it lightens. And this is the way it lightens instead. From brown to blonde, it goes from brown to reddish brown to red to orange to gold to pale yellow to yellow to pale yellow to gold to pale yellow. We don't want to lighten the hair past pale yellow, because then we get into white. And if you get into white, the hair is going to break off. You've taken out all of the protein out of the hair at that point, and you're going to get a lot of breakage. Okay, Kara here is saying I was getting asked about programmatic, so I got that right. Okay, Tracy said, I've heard this and never understood it until now. Thank you for explaining it this way. Great, Tracy. I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah, again, I try to explain things in a way that I know that here's the bottom line, guys. I found hair color so confusing when I first decided to learn how to do hair color, that I found the way they taught it so confusing that I thought to myself, there has to be an easier way to learn this. And that's why I wrote my books. That's why I wrote my books in plain English, because there is an easier way, but somebody has to really explain it to you, and I hope that I'm doing that. And Tracy, I appreciate your comment, because that's my job, is to take a complicated subject and try to make it easy that we can all understand it in plain English. Okay, so I appreciate that comment.